Tell me if you've heard this one before. It's the 80s, and two guys got together. They're both comic book artists, and they start creating what started off as a joke and would go on to become one of the most important, successful, and impactful indie comics of literally all time. That would go on to spawn countless TV shows, movies, toys, the whole nine yards. But the reality is, for all of the success that the Turtles have seen over the decades since their inception, at their beginning, they were the underdogs. At the beginning, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird had to fight, scratch, and claw for their artistic vision and for their creation to be taken seriously. 35 years ago, that dedication paid off. 35 years ago, that artistic integrity paid off when we received one of the most important entries into the entire Turtleverse. And we're diving deep and we're talking about it. Let's do it, Shellheads. The idea of a Turtles movie has been around almost as long as the Turtles themselves. The year 1984, the director, Roger Corman, reached out to Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird with a pitch. An R rated, dark and gritty 80s stylized version of the Turtles, played by 80s legends Sam Kinison, Billy Crystal, Bobcat Goldwalt, and Gallagher, wearing only green paint and a shell on their backs. Now, thankfully, like we said, Eastman and Laird had a little thing called artistic integrity. They were going to defend their creation and refused to let their creation be reduced down to a footnote and a joke. So, needless to say, the deal never materialized. Now, this isn't the last time that you would hear about Gallagher's involvement in the entire process of bringing the Turtles to the big screen. More specifically, by way of his manager, Gary Proper, who really dug the comics. And that is going to show as this story goes forward. Fast forward to the late 80s. Comic book movies were not taken seriously. They were seen as a bad investment on behalf of studios unless you featured one of the big name heroes from the big two. But TMNT licensor Mark Friedman saw that it was time to start trying to make a move. Because you see, the toy line that had really sparked Turtle Mania was in the dreaded third year. This is the point where toy lines start to decline historically. The TV show also nearing the end of its third season. So everything is kind of at a tipping point at this point. Now, you couple that with the fact that we're in the late 80s, which means Batmania is on the rise. It is starting to take over the toy shelves that once belonged to the Heroes in a Half Shell. Now, fortunately, Gary convinced his producing partner to contact Mirage Studios to secure the movie rights. The two pitched an idea to Friedman that would have seen comedy legends of the time playing the Turtles. But Friedman wasn't impressed. See, he also cared about the weight and significance of the Turtles and didn't want to see them get reduced down. That's when one of the producers brought in comedy writer Bobby Herbick, who was working on a script for Golden Harvest at the time. Golden Harvest is one of the most legendary Hong Kong based studios in cinema history, namely because they are famous for Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan films. So it seemed like a natural fit with martial arts at the core. But convincing producer Tom Gray was going to be a horse of a different color. See, Bobby tried repeatedly to sell Gray on the idea of a Turtles movie, but Gary wasn't even interested in looking at the property. One day, Bobby promised to drop the idea for good as long as Tom checked with his kids, the target demographic for the cartoon. This is exactly what changed Tom's mind. But he still wasn't completely convinced that it was a safe investment. And once everybody got together for a big meeting, Gray finally realized that what they were looking at creating actually wasn't very different from the Golden Harvest projects they had already been working on. They could cast stuntmen in suits instead of expensive actors. They could film in Hong Kong, sell the movie to Japan, make their money back through residuals and the secondary market. So the producers secured the movie rights from Kevin and Peter, but the creators still had approval rights on the story. Again, artistic integrity. And that would be the key to the movie that we would finally end up getting. This would prove to be a big deal for Bobby, who had to move to Massachusetts to get the movie approved. Many treatments were pitched to the creators, and it was known at some point we were going to get Mausers and Baxter Stockman. One of Bobby's more notable contributions was the character Tatsu, based on his sister's husband, a Japanese man Bobby saw as a yes boss kind of guy. In the end, the treatment Kevin and Peter agreed on focused on the Turtles fighting the Foot Clan, which was recruiting runaway teenagers off the streets. However, Bobby's script leaned too heavily on comedy for Kevin and Peter's taste, forcing the producers to take desperate measures to make the movie happen. See, remember, we are in the 80s. Cheesy comedy, cheesy action movies, they were the soup of the day. And it was becoming clear that to please the creators, they needed to bring someone in with an artistic view of the property that could flesh out the drama that wasn't present at this point. This is when Steve Barron and his producing company, Limelight Entertainment, were brought in to direct the movie. Tom contacted Steve because of his dominance over MTV, since he was a well known music video director. Steve Barron played a pivotal role in getting things right. And see, this is where the influence of those original Mirage comics play such an important part to the movie that we got, and why you see so much influence on the movie, because it was the comic book that sold Steve Barron on knowing that he needed to have his hands on this movie. He carefully selected scenes from the first set of graphic novels that he felt had to be in the film, significantly influencing the script. That's why, as we go through the movie, there are so many key tentpole things peppered throughout the movie that have since become the absolute landmarks of the original set of Turtle Stories. The next crucial addition was Tom Langan, who was brought in to do a page one rewrite of the script. Known for his work in television, Tom had a reputation of being fast and cheap. It was just 10 days to write the first draft. His script was critical in attracting a distributor to the film. being charged with being one of the guardians of, again, say it with me, creative integrity proved to be a challenge, considering the property already had a very popular cartoon that was way more lighthearted and way more kid friendly than what they were looking to create. So Steve had to merge the two universes together, retaining that darker, grittier tone of the comics while incorporating elements of the colored bandanas and April being the reporter in the movie to make the movie more kid friendly. Because remember, it was actually the TV show that gave each one of the turtles their distinct color, their distinct personality, their distinct weapons. It was the cartoon that influenced a lot of the key aesthetic attributes that we have through to today about the turtles. Despite the pressure from Golden Harvest to lighten the tone, Steve insisted on keeping the darkness, believing that kids could handle it, something that he learned from working on a variety of dark picture projects, including Jim Henson's Labyrinth. All of the pieces are starting to come together. To Steve, the darker tone would be perceived by kids as just being more realistic. And of course, realistic is a tall order. It is a lot to ask out of a franchise that centers around four main protagonists that are talking anthropomorphized turtles. Leveraging his experience, Barron brought in Jim Henson's Creature Workshop to do the legendary suits. They would accomplish this by upgrading their animatronic systems from the Storyteller and from Labyrinth, the Henson Performance Control System. The technological leap didn't come cheap. $4 million from the already tight budget went straight into the puppeteering system. This was a huge risk considering the film still hadn't even secured a distributor. See, this is the point where if you're a younger shellhead, you may be asking yourself questions like, well, it's Jim Henson. How could he not add to the weight and significance of this to help secure a distributor? And you're talking about the Turtles. You're talking about one of the most famous Saturday morning cartoons of all time. And it looks like all of the puzzle pieces should be in place for this to be a no brainer. And while beloved today, Henson Studios wasn't the name at that point that it is today. Labyrinth was considered a box office disappointment at the time. It wasn't until it hit the secondary market and time went on that it started to gain the fan base that it has. And then you add on the more recent failures of comic book and cartoon adaptations like Masters of the Universe and Howard the Duck. The thought was if even George Lucas couldn't make an adaptation a hit, what hope did a bunch of indie producers have? And so while Henson's team finished the suits, Tom Gray scrambled to secure funding. He struck a deal with 20th Century Fox for $6 million for the movie. But when the executive behind the deal was let go, the new regime pulled out. Time was ticking. They had already penned a deal with Henson's company that is called a pay or play contract. The idea being that regardless of whatever happens, they're still on the hook. They still owe them for these suits. And so Gray entered into talks with New Line Cinema, which offered him only 2 million instead of 6. See, at this point, this is before New Line became the juggernaut that Freddie built. This is before it became a major voice within the system. They were an indie studio at this point. Desperate, Gray turned to Golden Harvest founder Raymond Chow. He explained that canceling the project couldn't have even been an option. They didn't have the funds to pay off Henson's contract, which means a lawsuit was absolutely going to happen. It was in this pivotal moment that Gray promised Chow that the Turtles were already a marketing juggernaut and that they'd recoup their investment. Chow secured the 6 million and the film was back on track. But to say that all of the hurdles and the storm was behind them wouldn't be correct. So filming would get underway in July of 1989 in Wilmington, North Carolina, not long after Batman successfully hit theaters. Up to this point, the film had only a 10-week pre-production window and was scheduled to shoot for just 2 months. For anybody who doesn't know, this is wildly short. Jim Henson's Creature Shop already had the animatronic technology to animate the turtles' faces, but the physical demands of having a turtle perform backflips and fall down a sewer manhole required a more sophisticated radio controlled system, something that couldn't be achieved if the suits were hardwired. Splinter was the only exception to this, being a more traditional puppet. And so they shifted to a radio controlled setup. However, that presented unexpected complications, particularly in shooting at the farmhouse near an airport. See, every time a plane passed by, the turtles' faces glitched and morphed into nightmarish spasms, making filming impossible during this time. It forced the crew to switch to a military frequency, which, in case you didn't know, is incredibly illegal. As you could imagine, being inside of one of these suits was a nightmare. The shells housed the computers that controlled the facial expressions, adding significant weight to the suits. On top of that, the film was shot in temperatures ranging around 95 degrees with, oh, I don't know, about 98% humidity. Actors were often dehydrated and even were known to pass out from the heat. The suits weighed between 50 and 60 pounds. But after a long day of sweating inside them, they could weigh up to 70 or 80 pounds. As a result, the turtles sometimes moved very slowly. Getting creative to counteract this, Steve Barron filmed at a higher frame rate, allowing him to speed up the footage when necessary. The suits were also prone to tearing, so multiple turtle limbs were kept on hand for quick changeouts, for quick replacements. To give the turtles more nuanced mouth movements, puppeteers wore lip reading braces. But not all heads were sophisticated. There were two types of suits. One designed for the stuntmen, which were lighter and free of the electronics, and the more complex suits worn by the actors. Acting inside the suits required perfect synchronization between the puppeteer and the actor. They delivered their lines simultaneously, creating for a chaotic experience on set. A lot of the lines would be later replaced through ADR. As you might guess, the audio from the set could not be used. Between the double delivery of lines and the noise of the servos and the deafening chorus of crickets that invaded the set, all the lines, even those from human actors, had to be dubbed in post. Now, if you think it was an easier time for the stunt actor, you would be incorrect. See, the suits that they had to wear were still heavy and didn't provide a whole lot of protection. One of the stuntmen was actually injured and replaced by Ernie Reyes Jr., who would later star as Kino in the sequel, a story in and of itself. Not all scenes were filmed in Wilmington. Production spent 4 days in New York for establishing shots, while everything else was filmed on sets except for the Central Park scene, which was shot in a rural area. At this point, Steve was deep in post production, working alongside editor Sally Mennick to shape the film. However, they quickly ran into an issue. They realized there just simply was not enough time to film everything that was in the script. That's why we have a lot of deleted content that we'll actually get into later on in the video. Steve felt like certain gaps needed to be filled. However, this would require more money, and Golden Harvest just simply refused. This is when Jim Henson stepped in with some help, connecting Steve Barron with Jeffrey Katzenberg from Disney. Steve met with Katzenberg behind Tom Gray's back. After watching the rough cut, Jeffrey Katzenberg was impressed and called Tom to offer Disney's distribution services. Tom declined the offer as politely as possible, but underneath, he was furious with Steve for going behind his back. And it's actually because of this that Steve and Sally's involvement with the movie ended quickly thereafter. At this point, a lot of scenes and extended sequences were cut from the film, leaving enough material that could have been a director's cut by itself. By the end of 1989, the movie was tested for public screenings for kids, which were wildly successful. The response was so strong that New Line realized they hadn't printed enough copies of the movie, and they had to scramble to double the amount that they had before the official release. However, despite all of the positive reaction, executives were still second guessing the film and were pretty sure that they were killing the franchise. Before we go any further into the behind the scenes and the reaction to the movie, let's recap the movie itself. So, with that out of the way, whether you're brand new or it's been a while, let's dive into the story. New York City is in the grips of a crime wave that seems to be taking over the city, leaving the police baffled. The only clue that they have is a smattering of reports of teenagers that are being spotted at the scenes of the crimes that are taking place. But Channel 3 reporter April O'Neil is on the case after receiving reports that something similar to what was happening in New York happened several years ago in Japan. She's determined to find out if the two situations are in fact connected. After wrapping up her broadcast, she heads back to her van only to find a group of teenagers trying to rob it. When they try to take her bag, she bravely fights them off. Fortunately for her, a flying sigh kills the lights, and by the time the police show up to illuminate the situation, the criminals have all been tied up. April finds a sigh sitting beside her, puts it in her bag, much to Raph's chagrin. This marked the Turtles' first fight on the surface, and they are ecstatic, struggling to find the right word to describe their excitement. After learning that Raph lost his sai in the battle, Master Splinter urges him to just let it go. It was more important to keep themselves out of sight than it was to get his weapon. He warned them that their ninja skills were reaching their apex and that they needed to use them wisely, since one day he's not going to be there to guide them when they need it. The turtles quickly try to push aside that somber thought, choosing instead to celebrate the victory at hand with music and pizza, as one should.
Want a large, thick crust with double cheese, ham, pepperoni, no anchovies. And I mean no anchovies. You put anchovies on this thing and you're in big trouble, okay?
Ecco, leggi low.
That'll do. And the clock's ticking, dude.
Needing a distraction, Raph went to the movies to watch Critters. On his way out, he witnessed two teenagers stealing a purse. He intervenes, forcing them to return it. But they escaped into Central Park, where they're ambushed by none other than the hockey mask wearing hero, Casey Jones, a vigilante ready to dish out some rough justice. Realizing that Casey was about to go too far, Raph steps in, allowing the kids to escape. This leads to a brief but memorable altercation between the two, ending with Casey making his getaway. Once he gets back to the lair, Raph is surprised by Splinter, who made him sit down and have a talk. Splinter tried to help Raph channel his anger, but it was clear that Raph still struggled with it alone. Splinter reminds him that he didn't have to. He doesn't have to go it alone. His brothers were there for him, and Splinter's wisdom would always be with him in his heart. The next day, April pressed the chief of police about the existence of the Foot Clan during a live broadcast. This catches the eye of none other than the Shredder, who ordered his men to silence her. But the Turtles were also watching the news and recognized April as the woman that they had recently saved. This was all the information that Raph needed to retrieve his lost Sai. Yes, Raph disobeys Splinter by going, shocker, but he ended up saving April's life from the Foot Clan. With April unconscious from the altercation, Raph had no choice but to bring her back to the lair, unaware that she had been followed by foot ninjas. April woke up to a completely surreal landscape in the sewers, surrounded by a talking rat and his four talking turtle sons. To calm her down, Splinter gave her their backstory, gave her the needed exposition dump. Once a pet of his master Yoshi in Japan, Splinter had learned the art of ninjutsu by mimicking his master's movements from inside his cage. After a series of events forced Yoshi to flee to New York, Splinter ended up alone in the streets. One day, while scavenging in the sewers, he found four baby turtles around a broken glass jar, crawling through a strange, glowing ooze. Splinter took care of them and soon noticed that they were growing in size as well as intelligence at a rapid pace. Seeing this, he taught them all he had learned from his master and gave them their names. April starts to adjust to her new reality, taking in the story. Once they're done, the turtles help her back to her place, where, of course, they share in some pizza. Thanks to the turtles' infinite charm, April finally feels at ease with them. Unfortunately, though, when the turtles returned to their lair, they found it wrecked, with clear signs of a struggle and Splinter gone, or worse. The turtles were finally forced into the situation that they had dreaded, that their master warned them about. He wasn't there for them anymore. And with nowhere else to go, they move in with April. April's boss, Charles Pennington, finds himself in a difficult position with his son, Danny. He got in trouble with the law for stealing on behalf of the Foot Clan. After discovering the connection, the police chief makes a deal with Pennington, pressuring him to persuade April to give the police a break on her investigation with the city's crime wave. But what exactly was the Foot Clan? Well, the Foot Clan is a criminal organization that recruits runaway teens, training them to become ninjas under the leadership of none other than the Shredder and his second in command, Tatu. The clan operates like a cult. The recruits were told that the outside world had rejected them. But within the Foot Clan, they had found a new family with Shredder as their father. After capturing Splinter, Shredder made it his top priority to locate and capture the remaining mutant turtles. When Danny had recently seen one of the turtles at April's apartment, he realized he could help his family figure out where the turtles were. Meanwhile, Raph's impatience was growing. Splinter was nowhere to be found. And to him, he needed help. He couldn't accept that anything worse could have happened to him. It was their job to find him. This frustration leads to one of the timeless attributes of the Turtles, an argument between Raph and Leo. And in typical fashion, Raph storms off to blow off some steam on the rooftop. At the same time, Casey Jones, who's scanning the police radio, spots Raph from the distance, surrounded by foot ninjas. April returns home without any new news, though she hoped that viewers would start calling in with tips about the Foot Clan. Unaware that the battle was brewing above, she gave the other turtles a tour of her father's antique store until Raph crashes through the skylight in front of them, having been ambushed by the Foot Clan. The clan, led by Tatsu, invade the building. Casey Jones tries to rush to their aid to help, but in the chaos of the ensuing battle, a fire breaks out, threatening the already fragile building. April quickly leads the Turtles and Casey through a trap door in the basement, but not before discovering through an answering machine that she'd lost her job. As the building burned, the Turtles and Casey escaped to April's family farmhouse, watching the flames consume the building. Danny can't help but feel guilty about his role in leading the Foot Clan straight to them. Later, after witnessing Tatsu's brutal punishment of the ninjas for their failed mission, Danny starts to question his loyalty to his newfound family. He seeks out Splinter, who recognized the inner turmoil in the boy. Splinter assures Danny that he's there to listen, offering a compassionate ear. While at the farmhouse, the turtles waited for Raph to recover from his injuries, grappling with the uncertainty and unease of the entire situation. Raph's physical recovery did little to ease the turtles' minds. Seeking peace and guidance, Leo meditates for hours, reaching out with his mind until he makes contact with Splinter. Overwhelmed with relief at the confirmation that Splinter was in fact still alive, Leo hurried to gather his brothers together for a group meditation session. Together, the turtles connect with Splinter once again. He congratulates them for learning the final and greatest truth of the ninja. Ultimate mastery comes not from the body, but from the mind. Perhaps fearing this might be their last conversation, Splinter reminds them that he loves them dearly and that his love for them was the key to staying united. Reinvigorated by their spiritual connection, the turtles resume their training. Once they reach a stronger state of mind, they decide it's time to return back to New York and confront their enemies. Once they return, they discover Danny hiding out at the lair, torn between two worlds, between his two conflicting families. He convinced April to let him stay the night, claiming that he was just running away from his dad. April and Danny bond over the secret origin of the turtles, and she gave him one of their sketches. However, in the middle of the night, haunted by a nightmare, Danny wakes up and returns back to the Foot Clan headquarters at the East Warehouse on Leardman Island. Unbeknownst to him, Casey, who was sleeping in his truck, sees him leave and decides to follow him back to the headquarters. Danny seeks out Splinter again, who finally shares his full origin story. He tells him of his old master, Hamato Yoshi, a great warrior who had a fierce rival, Oroku Saki. They competed in all things, but none more fiercely than for the love of a woman named Tang Shen. Knowing Saki's jealousy would lead to violence, Shen persuaded Yoshi to move to America. However, Saki tracked them down and killed Tang Shen and lay in wait for Yoshi's return. When Yoshi arrives back, Saki took his life. During the chaos, Splinter, whose cage had been broken, attacks Saki and scratched his face in retaliation. Saki slices Splinter's ear, but Splinter managed to escape. Intrigued by the open ended story, Danny asks whatever happened to Oroku Saki. And that's when he reveals that he is wearing the symbol on his headband. At that moment, Shredder appears, catching Danny with the stolen turtle sketch. Realizing that the turtles had returned, Shredder rallies the Foot Clan and orders Tatsu to kill Splinter. In the ensuing chaos, though, Casey finds Danny, who now sees the truth about his false father figure. Together, they manage to rescue Splinter. However, Tatsu soon discovers them. With some quick thinking, some smarts, and a stolen golf club, Casey overpowers Tatsu. Then we cut to the turtle lair. The Foot Clan invade, leading to a fierce and lengthy battle. Wave after wave of Foot Clan come in at the turtles, but it soon becomes apparent that this might have been a ploy to drive them out of the sewers. As the fight escalates to the rooftop, the Shredder finally appears. Meanwhile, Casey and the others arrive with Splinter, who quickly makes their way to the rooftop to intervene in the chaos. This was when Oroku Saki, now the Shredder, realizes that Splinter was the rat that had scarred his face all those years ago. Filled with rage, the Shredder charges at Splinter. But using Mikey's nunchucks, Splinter trips Shredder, leaving him dangling precariously by his sharpened bow staff. In a last ditch effort, Shredder throws a knife at Splinter, but the act seals his fate. Splinter releases his grip, and Shredder plummets into the back of a garbage truck. And to finish the job,
Oops!
with the battle over, the Turtles and Splinter finally reunite with a cowabunga. As the police and the press arrive at the scene, the storylines come full circle. Inspired by the Turtles' true sense of family, Danny returns the $20 that he had stolen from April. He then reunites with his dad, who had been desperately searching for him. In a display of newfound maturity, Danny asks his dad if he'd just call him Dan from now on. April also found herself with a happy ending. She got her job back with a better salary and a nicer office. And just before going live again, April and Casey finally acknowledge their lingering feelings for each other and share a kiss as we roll credits. Like we talked about earlier, this movie has a ridiculous amount of unshot material. Something like 12 to 15 pages worth of content were left unshot, either because of budget issues, time constraints, or backstage drama. Missing pieces, along with the removal of any traces of blood, were just some of the casualties of post production. Those deleted scenes oftentimes offered valuable context to the story as a whole. There's actually a script revision from 1989, as well as the movie novelization by Bonnie Bryan Hiller, as well as the black and white comic adaptation produced by Mirage. Both the novelization and the comics were based on the script rather than the movie's final cut. The script originally opened with a familiar yet different setting. Similar to some of the video game adaptations, the movie would begin with a manhole cover being blown away, leading the camera into the sewer lair. Here we would have April's report on the city's silent crime wave, setting the stage for the story. Parts of this sequence were filmed and can be seen in the theatrical trailer, including the iconic shot of the turtle shells coming out of the water. The version that we would get in the movie would splice some of this material with the teenagers stealing for the Foot Clan. Raph's trip to the movies was actually supposed to be a lot closer to pretty much right out of the comics. We wouldn't have seen Raph go to see E.T., though in the comic it was changed to Bat Dude. And then there would be a scene that introduced Casey in his apartment looking on the news of the rising crime rate. A significant difference lies in the origin story flashback. The first flashback was intended to be in black and white with slow motion and accent colors, staying true to the original Mirage comics. In this version, Splinter witnessed a man save a blind pedestrian from a truck, only to be hit by a canister of ooze, which then shattered the jar holding the baby turtles. Not wanting a very clear and obvious lawsuit from Marvel, because, Daredevil, they nixed all of that. The Shredder's introduction scene has a clear cut in the final version right after some of the ninjas roll out a carpet in front of him. In the full scene, he was going to sit down and Tatsu would have placed a headband on one of his shoulders. The whole thing would have been essentially a gauntlet for the thugs that were arrested after trying to rob April. Whoever got their hands on the headband wouldn't have been spared from punishment. The kids never stood a chance, and they all ended up with scars to remind them of their price for failure. One of the most famous lines that Shredder speaks in the entire movie:
You are here because the outside world rejects you. This is your family. I am your father.
And pushing the other kids, including Danny, to realize that the Foot was not really their family. The decision to change the audio in post production implies that Shincho survived and was likely made to avoid making the film even darker than it already was. There were also several scenes at the farmhouse, establishing more of the story that came from the comics before the return to New York. And this actually would have further developed the relationship between April, where in the actual cut, that doesn't become a thing until really the end of the movie. Another notable difference in the script is Danny stole April's sketch when he left the lair. This was changed in a later revision as the scene where April gives the sketch to Danny is present in the novelization and makes more thematic sense. A small but missing scene involved April and the Turtles realizing that Danny had taken the sketch, alerting them to the fact that the foot was on their way to the lair. This is why they were prepared for the attack. The second flashback also follows the origin story from the comics. Yoshi's rival was Oroku Nagi, who also got violent with Shen, resulting in his death at the hands of Yoshi. Because of the Foot Clan's code of honor, Yoshi had to take his own life, but decided instead to leave for America with Shen and Splinter. This makes more sense than simply leaving Japan out of fear of Saki. Saki, on the other hand, would have also been Nagi's little brother, who wanted revenge on Yoshi. The only real difference with the comic is the part where Splinter and Saki mark each other, which was probably added there to make them recognize each other in the climax of the movie. The script revision also doesn't have any of the garbage truck scenes with Casey. The shredder would have fallen onto a moving garbage truck and ended up crushed inside. Neither the script or the adaptations have the oops line. It's my headcanon that he improv'd it and they just kept it. The comic removed the garbage truck altogether, implying that he basically hit the asphalt. Fun facts, it's actually around this part of the movie that Kevin Eastman has a chance to make his cameo in the movie. The last and likely most famous deleted scene from the movie is the last one. In this scene, Danny and April meet with a publisher to pitch a Turtles comic book, only to have it rejected for being too far fetched. The Turtles would be spying just outside the window and ended up shocked that they thought that they were too far fetched. This scene is in all of the adaptations and was included as an extra in at least one edition. Early screenings of the Turtles movie generated mixed reactions. Kids loved it. The mood shifted dramatically when the film was shown to adults, though. The divide in reception set the stage for what would be a nerve wracking lead up to the movie's release. Just before the film's premiere, Mark Friedman had a small screening for Playmates. The reaction was disastrous. They hated it. Friedman left the screening convinced that the movie was going to bomb, potentially dragging the entire franchise down with it. Thinking someone needed to show up for this movie, he bought tickets for himself and his wife for the movie's opening night. He was initially alone as he waited in line, but much to his surprise, the line quickly stretched around the block. The film didn't bomb, not even close. It was released on March 30th, 1990, and knocked Pretty Woman off the top of the box office, earning $25 million in its opening weekend. New Line strategically released the movie just before the school holidays, and as a result, it only dropped 28% in its second weekend, which was almost unprecedented at the time. By the end of its theatrical run, it had grossed $135 million, leaving all the studios that had previously rejected it in the dust. Critics, as usual, didn't know what to make of the Turtles. The reviews were mixed. Some criticized it for being too childish. Others thought that it wasn't appropriate for kids at all. Many, as was expected, were put off by all of the martial arts and perceived levels of violence. If it's any consolation, critics also hated Pretty Woman. And we all know what kind of legacy that movie has. In the wake of the movie's success, the Turtles brand exploded. Turtle Mania was here. Y'all, I have memories of watching this with my cousins at my grandfather's house. It was the first exposure that I had to the Turtles. One of the most important partnerships would come through Pizza Hut, which had initially passed on partnering for the film. They jumped on board for the VHS release in October of 1990, launching a $20 million advertising campaign. The Turtles broke all the records for an indie movie, a feat that wouldn't be surpassed until 1999's The Blair Witch Project. The Turtles had already proven themselves as a marketing powerhouse, but the success of the movie turned them into a cultural phenomenon, shaping the childhoods of an entire generation. The movie became a juggernaut, and it's speculated that its actual success might have even been greater than the box office numbers suggest, with kids paying half price to see the movie, and many of them returning to theaters multiple times. It's likely that the actual audience turnout was a lot higher than what was actually reported. But the truth is, the movie didn't just resonate with kids. It also resonated with teenagers and college students who made up the film's core demographic. See, that dark and gritty tone to the movie resonated with a bit older of an audience. And actually, many shellheads that I talked to found out about the Mirage comics by way of the movie, where a lot of fans of the TV show would go on really cementing their fandom in the subsequent TV shows that would come after that point. But as was the case in the 90s, parents were unhappy with the levels of violence in the movie and the franchise in general. This only confirmed Golden Harvest and Playmates' fears that the movie was too dark. They knew they needed to course correct with the sequel, but that is a conversation for another day. This movie left a mark. Does it hold up? Isn't even a question. It's not even a point of consideration. This movie is legendary and is a formative piece for a lot of shellheads of a particular vintage. It married the worlds of the comics with the cartoon to create something that we have not had since. That's part of why so many people are crying out for the live action Last Ronin movie to be an extension of this universe, because for many of us, this is the Turtles. For many of us, this is one of the highest points for the Turtleverse. But sound off below. Let me know, did you watch this movie when you were a kid? What's your experience with this movie? And what other pieces of the Turtleverse do you want to hear me cover? Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Make sure that you tick that bell so that way you do not miss any future uploads as we continue to explore the Turtleverse. I know it's been a minute, but friends, I love getting a chance to be able to break down in long form these pieces of essential Turtles viewing. Until next time, Cowabunga Shellheads.